That's it. Good. So we look forward this Shabbat to reading the second Torah reading that's connected to last week's Torah reading. Very often they're put together, Tazria and Metzorah. But our Haftarah has nothing to do with anything in the Torah reading. It's a special Haftarah. And I haven't really thought this through, but there really aren't that I can think of that many Haftarot that don't have a special Torah reading tied up to them. So, last week we had a special Torah reading and we had a special Haftarah that was connected to that Torah reading. But we don't have a special extra Torah reading this Shabbat, but we have a very special Haftarah, which is scheduled because it's the Shabbat before Pesach. So Pesach will fall next Shabbat. So the Shabbat before is this coming Shabbat. And the Shabbat before Pesach is called traditionally Shabbat HaGadol, right? So translated variously as the Great Shabbat or the Shabbat of the Great One. There's all kinds of explanations and speculations why the Shabbat before Pesach is called Shabbat HaGadol. Why is it called the Great Shabbat? We actually call Shabbat use Gadol as a reference for Shabbat every Shabbat. Yom HaShabbat HaGadol VaKadosh Hazeh. So we say that this day, if Shabbat is Gadol and great and holy, so in our prayers we refer to every Shabbat as a Shabbat HaGadol. But nevertheless, this Shabbat before Pesach is specifically referred to as that. So this Haftarah is chosen for this moment, and we'll have to think why is it appropriate for this moment as we read it. It comes from Malachi or Malachi. We've had Malachi before. Malachi is basically the last or one of the last prophets in the whole history of the Jewish prophetic heritage. The prophets start all the way back, Amos, and then Yeshayahu and Hosea, all the way back in the 8th century BCE. And now we are hearing from Malachi, who lives in the early 6th century, or the late 6th, early, like about 515 BCE. He lives in the period when the second temple has already been begun, and there's a restoration of the Jewish people in Judea. They've come back from the Babylonian exile. The first temple was destroyed in 586 BCE, and now this is 70 years later. And he's somewhere around that time when people are coming back and beginning to rebuild the temple. So this is now, we're at chapter 3 in Malachi. It's on page 1296 in our Eitz Chaim Chumash, Malachi chapter 3, beginning with verse 4. Will somebody please do us the favor of reading? Go ahead, Natalie, great. You unmuted?
What's the page? 129 what?
1296.
Okay. 1296. Starting with Shirley.
I have 1296. I have big 3 and then a little 4, and it says, then the offerings.
Okay, it says, surely the offerings of Judah and Jerusalem shall be pleasing to the Lord.
Wait, hold on, time out. You're reading from 1296 in the Eitz Chaim?
Yes.
No kidding. That's
Mhm.
very interesting. So I have a slightly different translation in my 1296 in the Eitz Chaim.
Me
They
Is
make
that
it
it?
different for the little one.
You
I
want
got
me to-
surely also.
Look at that. How many people have surely? Natalie, raise your hand. You have surely, right?
Oh,
And how many people have then? Look at that. So interesting. Okay, good. I have a feeling your edition is a more recent edition. We've got a slightly revised translation. Good. Let's go.
surely the offerings of Judah and Jerusalem shall be pleasing to the Lord, as in the days of yore and in the days of old. But first, I will step forward to contend against you, and I will act as a relentless accuser against those who have no fear of me, who practice sorcery, who commit adultery, who swear falsely, who cheat laborers of their hire, and who subvert the widow, orphan, and stranger, and the Lord of hosts.
And the Lord of hosts.
And the Lord of hosts.
Look at that.
Ours is different.
Slightly different, right? It said the Lord of hosts at the end.
Oh, I'm
it-
sorry. Said the Lord of hosts. I'm sorry.
And it
All right.
says, and who subvert in ours. Rabbi.
Right. But that we had, but that we have in brackets also the cause of the
cause of.
widow.
Yes. Am I supposed to be saying the brackets too?
Yes.
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 Okay. All right.
Phew.
Well, the
All
cause
right,
of the.
good. So it's not as different as we thought. Okay, so we have this. It's printed as a kind of introductory paragraph, and the promise here is that the good days are coming, right? The redemption is on its way, and the offerings of Judah and Jerusalem will be given, brought up to God, and God will be pleased. God will accept them and be happy, just like in the good old days, right? So this is a promise of the restoration of the temple rituals. But then verse 5 says, however, there's some accounting that has to be settled, right? I'm going to be very happy with all the good stuff that happens, but in order to get to that happiness, there's a certain amount of transgression that needs to be paid for, that needs to be looked at. What kinds of transgressions do we have?
Practicing sorcery.
Okay, I mean,
Committing
here's the-
adultery,
right?
swearing falsely, cheating laborers,
Commit adultery.
subverting the widow.
So so we have them here. So let's try to maybe conceptualize them a little bit or categorize them a little bit. What types of transgression are we talking about? So the idea of practicing sorcery, what would we say? Where is that? Let's go the opposite way. So many of the other sins are about not treating people right at the end.
Right.
So the widow, the orphan, the stranger, pay the laborer what you're supposed to, their salaries. So that's interpersonal bein adam lachavero, between one person and another human being, not treating them right. Okay. Committing adultery has that extra sexual component to it. You're betraying the person that you're supposed to be committed to faithfully, and you're being unfaithful. Okay, so that's an interpersonal, but in a very charged kind of way. Swearing falsely. What's the sin there? What type of sin is that? What category of sin is that?
That's
Well, it's also against another person that's saying something that's lying about what happened with another person, like in court and such. Yeah.
So you could see that as an interpersonal betrayal,
Yeah.
right? Testifying, falsely against another person or on behalf of another person,
Right.
Which is against somebody else. But it also could be a sin against God, right?
right.
That's one of the big 10. right? Don't take my
Right.
name in vain, don't swear falsely in my name. So that could be both sides of the coin. And so we've done basically everything here. What about sorcery now? What's bad about sorcery here? Yeah, Jen.
Actually, like if I would with if I wasn't thinking otherwise, other places in the Tanakh, I would be thinking like, oh, well, they can bleed a lot of money off of people who just want to get in touch with their dead husband or, whatever. But the only example that I can think of we have, or the main example, is a witch of Endor who wasn't faking it and was basically pretty nice. So I don't know exactly what kind of sorcery they're going after here.
Right. So first of all, we just have to understand that practicing sorcery, magic, is just plain forbidden. Before we get to the witch of Endor, it's an early prohibition, and it's understood to be a prohibition at the time of the witch of Endor. Saul is doing the wrong thing by going to her. So there's a realistic picture of the fact that just because it's wrong doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Doesn't mean that there isn't a desire for it, a demand for it. But the Torah says it's wrong. So is it wrong? Do we see it as an interpersonal violation?
No, I think I mean, if sorcery sort of suggests that there's some other power or something, so it's almost denying God's power, that, who God is.
I
Yeah,
think
or
I think that's pretty much a very primary reason for the prohibition against sorcery.
Oh, how come when we see it, it works? Like, if
I can't explain why it works, but if it does, that's a debatable question. Obviously, each case is its own case. But
no, I meant in the one case we see it in action when Saul goes to her. It seems to be realistic.
we've
She's
talked
not
ab-
telling him what he wants
Right.
to hear. It
Right.
seems to be a real
So-
thing.
So we've talked about it on other times. Even if it works, it's wrong, right? It's the wrong mechanism for a person to seek support or reassurance, or how to go about living their life, and getting some wisdom or guidance for how to live their life. It's even if it works, it's no good. Why? Because as Sarita says, because it's not going to God, it's going to some other powers, and thinking that you can have control over everything, or that they have control over everything, and then you can cozy up to them, and they'll be on your side and take care of you. So if we see all of these sins, it's really a preponderance of interpersonal transgressions, except for that, sorcery thing, and except for maybe swearing falsely, but those are interspersed within any number of violations of people's power over other people, right? Because we're talking about people who have taken advantage of people who are employers, who have control over the person that's worked for them, or the marginal people in society that need help and they don't get it. So this is in line with so many different times that the Torah keeps on talking about what does God really, really, really care about. So yes, God doesn't want to be, treated like a doormat, but one of the most important things that God desires is that we treat each other properly. Yeah, Lynn.
One could make a case that sorcery, then, in light of what you've just expounded upon, would also be against people. If you're professing to know something that God doesn't want you to know, or you're professing to have control over something that really is in God's domain, you could say that that's a sin against people, interpersonal as well. Does that make?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
also in the case of fraudulently, when you're just bleeding someone of their money,
Right,
who,
right.
yeah.
Taking advantage of them, right? Taking advantage of their desperation and their need for some kind of support. So yeah, very good. Okay, so again, what this is about is that it's all interconnected, right? God is not some separate power, but God is a caring God who is invested in how we form our relationships with each other as individuals and as a society. Okay, so now we keep going.
For I am the Lord. I have not changed, and you are the children of Jacob. You have not ceased to be. From the very
So what's
days of
the
your
for? What's the for? Right? The for means in consequence, right? Or what follows from what I just said is now what I'm saying, right? So how does it follow? What God is saying is, I've always been there for you, despite everything you went through. You just remember, Malachi is talking to people who've just gone through a traumatic, catastrophic experience of destruction and exile. And God says, here you are, you're still standing, right? You haven't disappeared, no matter how many things have happened to you. And I have always been there for you, right? I'm constantly there for you. How does this connect up with what we just read before? Yeah, Lynn.
Then maybe if we hurt each other, we're hurting God in a sense.
For sure, that's right. That's God is cares that we should do that for everybody else. And God is also saying, I'm there for you. Why aren't you there for each other? Right? Why are you not constant and faithful to each other? Okay, let's keep
It
going.
links with the first, it links with line 4, right?
Yeah,
Then the offerings of Judah and Jerusalem shall be pleasing to the Lord, right? And then I am the Lord, right? I've been here this whole time, but in between is how are you interacting with me? How are you interacting with other people? Right. So it's kind of sandwiched in between that.
good. Then we continue. Natalie.
From the very days of your father, you have turned away from my laws and have not observed them. Turn back to me, and I will turn back to you, said the Lord of hosts. But you ask, how shall we turn back? Ought man to defraud God? Yet you are defrauding me. And you ask, how have we been defrauding you? In tithe and contribution.
Okay,
You are
so
suffering.
let's stop for a half a second. We'll continue in a moment. So now we have another image of constancy, right? Except this is the constancy of I have always been there for you, right? And you are still here thanks to my support, and you have always rejected me. Like no matter what, how many times I've been there to pick you up from the time of your ancestors. You've always turned aside from my rules, from my laws, and you haven't kept them at all. You haven't taken care of them. And then, right, almost without it, there's not a break almost in the Hebrew. God, in the same breath that, so to speak, as complaining about how you've never really been faithful, God says, please come back, and I'll come back to you. Come on. Right. So it's like just an outburst of, I don't care that this has been our history all this time. Come back to me. Or what we could read this as, I have constantly called to you to come back to me. I've always promised to take you back and to return to you. And then you've always said, Va'amartem b'amen ashuv. How can we come back? Right? What is the translation here? But you ask, how shall we turn back? So what kind of response is that? What does it mean that we have said to God, how could we come back? Or in what way should we come back? God is the simplest thing is, I've called out to you and you never answer. Right? I want you to come back to me and you turned your back. But God sees this as actually a conversation. It's a dialogue. Come back to me. And we actually talk back to God. And we answer God, B'amen ashuv. So how do we understand such a scenario? What would it mean to say, to talk, confront God and say, I I don't see any way to come back to you. What would a person be thinking to say something like that?
But you've drifted so far, right? That there's like, there's so much baggage in between that how do you overcome that? Yeah.
So it could be the emotion behind it. I mean, yes, so there's this tremendous alienation. There's a distance here. There's an estrangement that seems to be impossible to overcome from our perspective. And then how do you feel about that? One way to feel about it is distraught and so broken up that I can't see how I can possibly, I wish I could, but it's too broken to be fixed.
What do we do first?
Yeah, I wouldn't know where to start. Right. Good. But, or another emotion could be one of resentment and anger. Right? The feeling of alienation, the feeling of estrangement could be so powerful that you throw back to God. Yeah. You really, and you can't accept it. You can't accept that there's a possibility of going back to God. It's not something that you can conceive of. Jen.
I feel like in this case, if we look at the verses before of what God is demanding in these interpersonal relationships, plus the sorcery thing, like if we get out of our own heads and don't really think don't let our emotions get in the way, I mean, it's not a lot that God is demanding right there. Like, I don't really normally day to day, I don't feel like a strong urge to try some sorcery out. And if you're cheating a widow, maybe don't do that anymore and make reparations. Like the actual list of what he's asking of us is not like, it's not rocket science. I feel like we could actually bridge that gap if we don't let guilt and, or anger get in the way of it.
Right. The prophets say this all the time, right? Micha says, God has told you what God wants. It's only a little simple thing, right? Right. It just says, just love, and do what's right and walk humbly with your God. That's all God has told you. I don't want a whole bunch. That's all I want. And somehow or other, it's too much, right? Somehow or other, we can't somehow conceive that that's really what it is. Some people would say that they don't see like those basics, except for the last one, about walking humbly with God. I would say for many people in modern times, the whole point is that all of that, just acting like a decent human being doesn't seem to have anything to do with God. No, I can be a good human being without God. So I don't see what the God element adds or does for me. I'll try to be as decent as I can be, but God, how do I come back to you? I don't see where you are in this. Some people would honestly, say that that's what, the modern secular humanistic tradition is all about.
But I mean,
So-
isn't that a case for even if somebody's not into religious views or God? I mean, if somebody's actually is really behaving as a decent human being, isn't that a win for God regardless? I think God would count that as the win column.
Well, what if God wants to be that person to be close to God? What if God says, it's great that you're very nice with everybody else, but I happen to want you to be close to me?
So what do we say to those people? As I think all of us would like to know what to say to those
I
people.
don't know. I don't proselytize, so I wouldn't say anything to that person. I would say, yay, you're a good person.
Right. So it's not that response is our response because that's what our business, and our business is, not to judge that person, but a prophet's business is something else. The point of being a prophet is that you can't stop speaking in God's name. Right? Not in human name, not in I'm not talking in God's name. I'm just me. But a prophet is somebody very different. A prophet is somebody who has been overtaken by the imperative, the command to speak what God is telling him in God's name. And what the prophet can reveal is something that we can't reveal. What the prophets are telling people is God wants you to come back to God. And being nice is all good and everything. That's great. But I also want you to come back to God. So how are we going to do it?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question. So I thought that to be a good Jew is in your actions, not in your beliefs. So can't you be coming close to God by way of your actions, whether or not you think that's what you're doing?
So this is the complicated and ambiguous situation that we occupy when we try to talk from different angles and different levels. I mentioned judgment. It's not for me to judge how a person, in the end measures up ultimately. Are they a good person or not a good person? I mean, sometimes it's just clear, person's a good person, and it's wonderful to know, to behold that, to actually see the goodness of another person is a gift for everybody. But the message that we have here is okay, that's great among you. There's only so much you can know. But now the prophet is revealing, that's what I'm trying to say. The prophet is revealing what we wouldn't know on our own. The prophet is revealing that God is screaming, I want you back. Not just to be a good person. I want you back with me. I want you to have some kind of consciousness of me. So again, we are obligated to respect each other. And when a person says, I'm a good person, and God doesn't play any role in my picture of reality or in my own sense of connection to anything, I think that we owe that person the respect of listening to them and accepting them in saying what they're saying. What some people like to do in the religious world is, see that really good person? They really are close to God, they just don't know it, right? So that's an attempt to be nice, but it's also, there's a danger of being patronizing when you do that, right? There's a danger of just not really accepting how that person wants to define themselves and how they want to be understood. So the fact that the Navi, the prophet, says that God is calling out like that is something that either we'll hear it or we won't hear it. That's up to us. And each person will some of us have better sense of hearing or not, or some of us can hear certain things and not hear other things. That's why we're reading this Haftorah, to see if we can hear it. Let's continue. Oh, so now the answer though is interesting, right? Verse 8. So the way it's translated here is, ought man to defraud God, right? Is that the right thing to do? And then you say, what do you mean? How did we defraud you? Right? And the answer is hamaaser v'atruma. Another way to translate that would be, is it possible for a person to defraud God? If a person actually had God in front of them, would it be possible for that person to actually decide to try to trick God or do something, to get away with it with God right in front of them? And the response again is, what have we ever done to you? How have we mistreated you? So there's a sense here of a grieved self-righteousness or self-defense. Have we really ever done anything bad to you? What do you care? There's a whole argument, right? A theology, people, oh, you know what? Does God really care? How big could God really be if God gets hurt by somebody saying that, something bad about God? God should be, if God is God, God should be bigger than that. So there's this kind of like sense of, come on. So they're saying, in what way could we possibly hurt you? In what way could we possibly steal from you? The answer is not, why don't you not defraud the widow? Why don't you not, but the answer is a kind of a legal and ritual set of terms, the tithing and the truma and the priestly gifts. The priestly gifts, of course, are important. Now the temple is back into operation, or starting to become back in operation. And the prophet here is saying that God says, you wanna not defraud me, don't withhold these gifts. Now the truma goes to the priest. Where does the maaser go? The tithing goes to 3 different groups. 1/10 tithing is a tenth, right? 1/10 of our produce goes to the Levites. And let's remember, both the priests and the Levites have no other source of income, supposedly, theoretically. So without those, they're poor. So they almost by definition are poor. In a landed society, in an agricultural world, they are landless. Right? So the 1/10 goes to them. Another 10th goes to us. Right? The 10th of our produce is a 3-year cycle. The 10th of our produce, we consume it ourselves, but we consume it in the presence of God, in the holy shrine, in front of the holy shrine, right? Eventually that becomes Jerusalem, right? With Malachi, it's the reinstitution of Jerusalem as the sacred center of the Jewish people. So in that sense, to sort of like push this a little bit, it means showing up in front of God to celebrate the holidays, instead of celebrating the holidays someplace else. Making a point of actually coming, and God should have the nachas. God should have the good feeling of watching you enjoy yourself eating a good meal. Right? So that's the other tithe. And then there's a third tithe. The third tithe goes to the poor. So that way we do actually come back to what was said earlier in the verse. If you're saying, what are you depriving me of? Right? You're depriving me of 3 things. You don't take care of the people who are devoted to serving me. You don't take care of actually engaging in your own self-care in a way that acknowledges me as wanting that to happen. And 3, you don't take care of poor people. So we come back again to that other message, but as we've mentioned so many times, the title of that book, Putting God on the Guest List, right? Including God as a presence. All right, we don't have too much time. Let's go a little bit more here.
You are suffering under a curse, yet you go on defrauding me, the whole nation of you. Bring the full tithe into the storehouse, and let there be food in my house, and thus put me to the test, said the Lord of hosts. I will surely open the floodgates of the sky for you and pour down blessings on you, and I will banish the locusts.
Wait, I want to just again comment on translations. So all of this is good. So what God is saying is, do this gift giving, right? These are offerings, givings. These are all things that you're giving from yourself to others, and even to yourself, with me there. And test me, says God, right? Because there's always the question, can I afford this? Is this in my interest? Why should I be giving away 10% of my income? It's just gonna impoverish me. God says, put me to the test. If you do that, believe me, I'll take care of it. Right? God says this, in a number of places in the Torah about this idea of tzedakah. The last thing is, it says, and I will surely open the floodgates of the sky for you and pour down blessings on you. It loses a tiny bit in the translation. The Hebrew is ad blidai, meaning I will pour it out unendingly. The Midrash says, ad sheyivalo siftotechem milomar dai, until your mouths will get dried out and chapped from saying, okay, enough, I got enough already. It's thank you, it's okay, good. So ad blidai, right? So endless benefits will accrue. I promise, says God. Test me on this. Put me to the test. Okay. So there's this. We've had this now throughout this whole section. This kind of back and forth. It's a little bit of a troubled relationship, right? It's not this like cushy, sweet, beautiful relationship. There's a little bit of ambivalence, a little roughness here, and God says, okay, so try me out. Let's see if we can, if your challenge to me can be met. I welcome it. Try it. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yes.
my sister-in-law is Christian, and she takes this tithing very, very seriously.
Good.
She tithes, but she even tithes. She won a big law settlement, not huge, but she won a settlement in a lawsuit, and she gave 10% away. And she feels that because of that, God will take care of her and look over her. And she, to the penny or so, she tithes for everything.
All right. At least, hopefully, I hope she gives the 10% to worthy causes.
She does.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, then, so win-win. What can I say? Right. Okay. Let's let's go all the way down. Let's skip a little bit. Let's read 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay.
You have spoken hard words against me, said the Lord. But you ask, what have we been saying amongst ourselves against you? You have said,
again, God says, don't fool me. You're challenging me, but you don't even want to admit it. Go ahead.
you have said it is useless to serve God. What have we gained by keeping his charge and walking in abject awe of the Lord of hosts? And so we account the arrogant happy. They have indeed done evil and endured. They have indeed dared God and escaped. In this vein, have those who revere the Lord been talking to one another?
No, not a question. That's the way people who revere the Lord have been talking to one another.
Oh, in this vein, have those who revere the Lord been talking to one another? The Lord has heard and noted it, and a scroll of remembrance has been written at his behest concerning those who revere the Lord and esteem his name.
Okay, so with just a couple of minutes that we have left, we have here now people who are challenging God by saying it's not worth it. God's calling us, we should return to God and everything, but guess what? All the people that reject God are doing fine. They're doing great. They're prospering and they don't seem to suffer any consequences. So how does that's not fair. How does that square with what God is saying, that God cares for us and that God wants us to be righteous? If the wicked are doing, so well, so apparently God doesn't really care. So God says, I'm taking note of that. I'm taking note of that. Those of us that were reading last week in Pirkei Avot, this verse.
In 1 minute, Rabbi.
Okay, thank you. So that was the alarm clock there. Very good. So duly noted, says God. Okay, so now let's go down to 19.
For lo, that day is at hand, burning like an oven. All the arrogant and all the doers of evil shall be straw. And the day that is coming, said the Lord of hosts, shall burn them to ashes and leave of them neither stock nor boughs.
Okay, so there's a big day coming, a day of judgment, and then you'll see that actually the evil will burn away and righteousness will triumph. Okay, 22.
22. Be mindful of the teaching of my servant Moses, whom
Or
I
another
charged.
translation is remember, Zichru Torah Moshe. Remember, right? Go ahead.
Whom I charged at Horeb with laws and rules for all Israel. Lo, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before the coming of the awesome, fearful day of the Lord. He shall reconcile parents with children and children with their parents, so that when I come, I do not strike the whole land with utter destruction.
And read that one verse again, verse 23. It's put in smaller print.
Lo, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before the coming of the awesome, fearful day of the Lord.
Okay. In the Hebrew, Lifnei vo Yom Hashem Hagadol veHanorah. Right? That's the Shabbat Hagadol possible connection. But still, we have a question. What does this have to do with Pesach? Why is this the Haftorah that's chanted on the Shabbat before Pesach?
Well, because we have, we're welcoming, we're hoping for Elijah.
Okay, so let's take note. This prophecy is over 2,500 years old. Elijah himself has been dead or disappeared, as the image goes, for a good 200 years. He has already, over those 200 years, 250 years, become a legend, so that the prophet Malachi can conjure him up, his image, as a popular image that everybody will understand. Elijah is going to come back and make everything better. Right? Elijah will restore the hearts of the parents to the children, and the children to the parents, and that's what's going to save the world. Because otherwise, if that wouldn't happen, God would have to destroy the entire world. So the key to redemption is in the parents and the children getting back together again. So one very quick suggestion: what's the essence of the Seder?
To teach the children.
But also the children asking questions. It's a
Right.
back
The
and
give
forth.
and take,
Yeah.
the give and take in a way that hopefully will not be as fraught as the give and take that we have in this Haftorah between God and God's children. All right. Take care. I want to wish everyone a Zisen Pesach, a sweet Pesach. Next week we will not be meeting. It's the night for getting ready for the Seder, and the following week is Yontif.
Right.
So for the next 2 Thursdays, we've got other things to do. Okay. Also, take
Good
care,
night.
everybody.
So, man.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.